Hi, Laura. Yes, you'll be able to send in your questions. So we'll give this another few minutes for people to log on.
Chantel?
Yes.
This is Kathy. Could you send the link to our student, Jeffrey Wren? I sent him the one that you sent me, but then it wouldn't allow me to sign in. It said I was already in the meeting on another device, which was his.
Sure.
So could you please let him in, or like send his email is jeffreywren@ottawa.ca. So please send him whatever you need so he can sign in to take notes.
Okay, I'll do that.
I didn't realize it was a problem. I've done that in other meetings and we've never had an issue, but that's why I'm a bit late. I couldn't get in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oops, I guess I had muted myself so nobody could hear me.
Yeah.
To think after almost a year and a half of this, we'd get the hang of it, right? All right, let me just see. I think we've got almost everyone on. We'll give this another couple of minutes and then we'll get started. All right, so still have a couple people joining, but we'll get started. Okay, all right, welcome everyone for the public meeting for 75 Granton. My name is Chantel and I'm with the Councillor's Office. I'll be your moderator for this evening. We have Kathy Rigas from the Planning Department with us tonight. We have Peter Hume representing the applicant, as well as Roberto Campagna from Roca Homes, who's the builder, as well as the architect and designer, William Ritzy, who will be giving some information. We will have some time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. So they can be put in the chat and we will go through. I did receive some in advance, so I will go through those as well. If we don't have time to address all of the questions this evening, we'll make sure that we can get back to you at the end. We're going to ask everyone to stay respectful this evening. So the microphones and cameras for participants are disabled to preserve bandwidth. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to include them in the chat, and we'll get to them as we go through. If there's any technical difficulties, I've got my colleague Rachel here as well. And we have the counselor here with us tonight as well. So on that note, I'm going to pass it over to Kathy to start the presentation.
Okay, Rachel, could you or someone put up the presentation, please?
And just before Kathy gets started, I'm just going to add that this session is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube after, so that those who cannot attend tonight can watch at a later date.
Okay, so my name is Kathy Rigas. I'm the planner in Development Review West, who is handling this application for a zoning bylaw amendment. Next slide, please. So that's just, I'm going to explain the planning process, and then the applicant will explain the details of the proposal. So the site in question is 75 Granton Avenue, which is located on the north side of Granton Avenue between Bassano and Pender Street. And the site is approximately 33 meters wide and 29 meters deep, and it's occupied by a single family dwelling. The property is next to a hydro easement that runs along Bassano Street, and the surrounding properties in the neighborhood are single family homes. Next slide, please. So this just shows the site in a more zoomed out area. Let's skip over. So in terms of the official plan, so when we're reviewing these applications for zoning bylaw amendments, one of the documents that we consider is the official plan. That's the guiding document for all development in the city of Ottawa. And this property is it's covered by on the location plan that you see. The area in yellow is what's called the general urban area. So that covers a lot of the city. And the general urban area permits a full range of housing types, including detached, semi-detached, townhouses, and apartments. And in the official plan for the general urban area, it permits buildings up to 4 stories in stable low-rise neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So this plan shows the rapid transit network schedule in the official plan. So Baseline Road is indicated as a bus rapid transit route, so what we call the BRT, and it's designated as an at-grade bus rapid transit route. So at-grade means simply that it will run along the surface of Baseline Road. Next slide, please. And this shows the urban road network in the official plan. So Baseline Road, the red line, is designated as an arterial road. Bassano and Granton are designated as local roads. So this shows the, on this plan, the roads that are colored in are the major arterials, and collector streets. Next slide, please. So the zoning of the property is, zoning is covered by our comprehensive zoning bylaw. It's called bylaw 2008-250. And all properties in the city of Ottawa have a zoning applied to them. And each zone allows particular uses and a particular set of zoning provisions in terms of height and setbacks. So in this case, the property is zoned residential first density, called subzone FF, exception 632. So R1, or I guess on the next slide, I'll go into what the zoning permits. So the surrounding zones, you can see that the properties on Granton and the surrounding streets are zoned the R1FF. The hydro corridor is zoned O1, which means parks and open space. And the properties on baseline are residential second density, which allows singles and semi-detached. Next slide, please. So what does the current R1 zoning allow? So if you were to check the zoning bylaw, each zone permits a specific set of land uses. So within the R1, these are the permitted uses. It allows a detached dwelling, a bed and breakfast, a diplomatic mission, group home or retirement home, home-based business or daycare. A secondary dwelling unit is permitted in a detached home, also in any single, semi-detached or townhouse in the entire city of Ottawa. It also allows a park or urban agriculture. So we talked about the subzone FF. Each subzone sets out specific criteria. So in this case, the R1FF zone sets out the requirements for the minimum lot width, lot area, and then the rear, front, side yard setbacks. And there's a site-specific exception that's applicable to many properties in the neighborhood, and it allows a portion of a rear lane to be calculated in the area of the lot area and rear yard. Next slide, please. So what is a zoning bylaw amendment? Just to clarify what is being requested here. So the zoning bylaw establishes provisions for how development takes place on a property. So as I mentioned before, it identifies the permitted uses and also the setbacks, building height, and other provisions. And if an individual wants to develop a property in a manner that doesn't comply with the current zoning provisions, they have to apply for a zoning bylaw amendment, which is also sometimes called a rezoning. So a zoning bylaw amendment can deal with the use, the lot size, the parking requirement, building height, a type of housing, or other specific uses. Next slide, please. So what does the proposed zoning allow? In this case, the applicant is requesting that the property be rezoned from the R1FF 632 to R2E. So the R2 zone permits semi-detached dwellings as well as detached. That's the main difference between the two. And the subzone E sets out the specific provisions such as the maximum height and the yard setbacks that are applicable in that R2E zone. So the reason for the rezoning is to permit 2 pairs of semi-detached dwellings on the property. So that's why the R2 is needed, because the R1 doesn't allow semi-detached. And the proposal would incorporate what we call secondary dwelling units, a basement apartment. And that is not part of the rezoning. A basement apartment, or what we call a secondary dwelling unit, is permitted in any single family house, any semi-detached, or any townhouse in the entire city of Ottawa. So that's not a component of the rezoning. That's allowed in any dwelling unit. Next slide, please. So this application was circulated about a month ago, and I've had a lot of comments. And in terms of the gist of the comments that I've received, the 4 main things are that this rezoning would be a precedent for further similar applications. that the infrastructure in the neighborhood can't handle it, that it changes the neighborhood character, and that it would generate traffic and parking issues. Could we go back? It jumped backwards. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of what does the city review, we review all applications for zoning bylaw amendment in the context of all the planning policies that are applicable. So we're looking at it in conformity with the official plan policies, with its compatibility with adjacent uses, the suitability of the land for the proposed use, including the size and type of lot that's being created, and adequacy of servicing. Now, in conjunction with this rezoning application, we will be receiving what's called a part lot control application. And that is similar to a severance in that it's an application to create the conveyable parcels. And through that application, we look at the detailed plans, and that would include the review of the servicing, grading, stormwater management, the siting of the buildings on the lot, landscaping, those elements. So we have a lot of information already that has been submitted as part of the rezoning. For example, they have done a tree information report, a landscape plan. They've done an adequacy of servicing brief and various studies, but we get into more detail through a part lot control application. Next slide, please. So in terms of the process for a rezoning, so as I mentioned, the application was circulated to both technical agencies and to the public. And so the comment period is ending this week, but we'll continue to gather public comments. So there's a period of issue resolution that's next. We may have comments on the application. We may request additional information from the applicant. And so there's a issue resolution period. So following that, a staff report is prepared for consideration by planning committee. So this is the standard process in any rezoning. We prepare a staff report with a recommendation. Planning committee considers the staff report and makes a recommendation to city council. So if the application is approved, city council enacts a bylaw, and the notice of a bylaw passing is circulated to owners within 120 meters or anyone else who provided comments. Now, in terms of the planning committee meeting, anyone who provided me with comments is already on the notification list. So that's how all of you received notice of this meeting, was that I had been keeping a notification list from all the emails that I received, and everyone would be sent notice of planning committee approximately 10 days before the meeting happened. So going back to the process, the notice of bylaw passing is sent out, and then there's a 20-day appeal period where a person can file an objection, which is also called an appeal, to the bylaw. If there are no appeals, then the bylaw comes into effect. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic just showing the whole rezoning process. So it starts with application submission. The application is deemed complete, which is simply a step to ensure that they have submitted the required documents to be circulated. I did a community heads up to the City View Community Association to advise them that the application was received and would be circulated shortly. An on-site sign was posted. We did the circulation about a month ago. So we are here, we're doing a community comment and information session. Then there's an issue resolution, the report preparation, report sign off by management, the planning committee meeting, or the notice of the meeting itself, council, and notice of decision. So this is basically what I had gone over in the previous slide. So next slide, please. So for anyone that wants to provide input and participate in the process, as I mentioned, I've had a high volume of comments, and although the formal comment period ends this week, anyone else is welcome to still continue to send me comments. The 4-week notification or the 4-week comment period is a standard period on all applications. but we do consider comments and accept them until the time that we are preparing a planning committee report. And at that point, I do a synopsis of public comments, and we also include how many comments were received. So we don't have a date at this point for planning committee, so I'm still accepting comments. So you can provide your comments either through the link in the development application search tool or directly to me. And when it comes time for planning committee to consider the matter, you would be receiving notice, and you can attend virtually the planning committee meeting, which is held via Zoom. So next slide, please. So that's it for the process. And now we'll have the applicant present the specifics of the proposal. And then after that, we'll move into the questions and answer period. But we're holding questions until you've had a chance to hear the whole proposal. So I'll turn it over to Peter Hume next. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I think that Kathy's given you a really good overview of the process, but I want to focus before we get into our design emphasis and what the proposal is with William and Roberto. I think it's important to kind of talk a little bit about the underpinnings of the planning process. The official plan is really the prime document. So it has primacy. A lot of people think zoning has primacy. Actually, it's the official plan. And the official plans in the city of Ottawa set out the policy, and the zoning bylaws implement that policy. And zoning bylaws, as according to the Planning Act, should be updated every time an official plan is changed or updated. And in fact, in the new official plan that's coming forward this coming fall, I think the city has, after it's approved, quite a large 4-year project to update and modernize its zoning bylaw, so it will be in conformity to the official plan. So and of course, when zoning bylaws are in conformity with official plans, there's not a necessity to go through zoning processes like this, where the zoning bylaw isn't necessarily in conformity with the directions of the official plan. The current official plan that's in place, or it's in place for the next little while, is really a plan that's focused on managing growth by directing that growth to the urban area. And in fact, when you read the plan, it says very clearly that 40% of all the growth in Ottawa is to be achieved through intensification. So existing neighborhoods, close to public transit, and those and the supporting policies, when we talk about design and implementation, are all designed to accommodate that 40% of growth within the urban area, and really to make the intensification work. And you're seeing that occur all across the city now. If you look in some places, for example, on Carling Avenue, they're rezoning properties because transit is coming to Carling Avenue. LRT, in fact, is coming to, well, will come in the future to Carling Avenue. And, modest 3-story buildings are being replaced with quite large apartment towers. And that's an example of where policy is directing one thing and the zoning bylaw hasn't caught up. So the official plan that the city has now really isn't a document that protects the status quo. It's quite the opposite. It's really a change document. And really that's why we're here today, because we have an official plan that gives clear direction, sets out a clear policy for people like myself and the other owners of the property to follow. And we think that this plan, and I'm sure you're thinking, and I've read all your comments, and we appreciate the feedback we're getting from you. We know that you're not on for what the official plan calls for. So I think it's important for us to talk not only about what the current official plan says, but what the new official plan says, because the new official plan that will be voted on this coming fall doubles down on intensification, and it says that 60% of new growth, new homes will be accommodated through intensification, and it really focuses on what's called the missing middle, and that's what that's the specialty that myself and Mr. Sterling and Mr. Campagna have focused on. Those sort of human scale, low scale, ground oriented, family style accommodations that meet the goals of the official plan. Another real key point is that they want this intensification to focus around transit. And whether we agree with it or not, within the city's plan is a significant transit corridor along Baseline Road. And that's going to be BRT with BRT type bus rapid transit, BRT type transit stations, 4 of them from Maryvale to Navajo. And so what they've designated in the new official plan is what's called a Main Street corridor. So that they're really thinking that this is going to be a place where we're going to see some significant change. And now you're probably saying to yourself, like, why is this guy telling me about this? What does it matter to me what's going to happen on Baseline Road? Well, it matters because, as I said earlier on, the policies set the direction, zoning bylaws implement what the official plan says. So when you look at a corridor like Baseline is going to be, a corridor is almost 200 meters wide. And so, and within that corridor, the city is, and the official plan is indicating that there's going to be intensification within that corridor. And that, however you interpret the draft official plan, means that there's going to be intensification along Baseline Road and in the neighborhoods immediately adjacent to it. And I don't know whether those are going to be more semi-detached in some locations. It's not going to be everywhere. It's going to be in some locations. I don't know. But what I can say is that people look, especially in the business of providing housing, look to those rules, and they look to those policies. And so, my advice to you, whether you accept it or not, or whether you agree with the policy, is that I think that given what the feedback that we've been hearing about how you really want to preserve the status quo, I think you as a community and your counselor, of course, and your community association need to spend some time and energy understanding the change in the official plan and what it actually proposes for you, and really work to try and figure out a way to manage it because I don't think, and I'm basing this on your feedback, I don't think preservation of the status quo is going to be a very successful strategy for your community. So, you know, in broad terms, the city's official plan, this one and the next one, promote and encourage intensification. And that's actually why we're here tonight, because that we believe that 75 Granton Street is an appropriate spot for the intensification that the official plan calls for. We've got, and you know, the partnership here is an award-winning home builder in Roberto Campagna, and you know, a paramount urban designer in Mr. Ritzy, who was going to talk in a little bit. And we really think that, you know, as intensification, these are going to be very, we believe they're compatible. We know you don't, but that these are going to be, you know, positive additions to the community and home to, you know, the families that will own them. So with that grounding in the official plan, and I really thought it was important because a lot of you asked, why are you coming here? Well, it's because the official plan indicates that sites like this, not everyone, sites like this are candidates for intensification, and that's why we're looking at these sites. So I'm going to turn it over to Bill and Roberto to walk you through some of the design elements, because he has spent a tremendous amount of time on those elements to make them what we're bringing forward as attractive to new home buyers as possible. He has, as I said, an award-winning style, and you know, I think that they're going to be a positive addition to the community. I'm not sure, based on the comments that I've been reading, that anyone else does, but there it is. So Roberto and Bill, over to you.
I guess good evening. My name is Bill Ritzy. I was working with our team in terms of developing two sets of semi-detached dwellings. I will focus primarily on the semis as a physical entity, as we've been talking about it. The other major issues, which we are here tonight, is regarding planning principles and zoning. The approach that Peter just talked about in terms of its site location, the context is always an important piece as starting out, and the fact that it was located abutting an open space by the hydro corridor, it was an opportunity to, in this community, to introduce another form of housing. I know there's been a growing trend to subdivide to 50-foot lots from the 100. So if you look at each individual semi, they're on basically a 50-foot lot. And when we first approached the design, just from a general, let's just focus on the massing and how it relates to a 50-foot lot. So the massing complies to all the zoning standards in terms of setbacks. Actually, the side yard setbacks are slightly greater than what's required in the current zone for singles. So spatial separation is always important. So in terms of the rear and the side, and also the front, especially the side on the hydro corridor. The original idea or design was to have the driveways, garages separated and leaving separate single loaded driveways. So it seemed reasonable, and we want these semi-detached masses to be as part of the community as the current new standard of single family homes are being built. So but on the same hand, we are attracting individual home buyers. So therefore there has to be some sense of individuality given to them, particularly as it is their front entrance. So the original design of the garage, the driveways being on the outside outboard, we moved inboard, and the individual entrances to each unit were now on the exterior, which gave them that sense of privacy and that sense of entrance. The overall massing, they're basically all under one roof. So which would be similar to a larger single in any area of the city, with some modulation of the two types. And the two types are one of a craftsman style, which is on the left-hand side, abutting the open space, and a more contemporary, low, modest roof line on the interior, which would be abutting existing houses. So the larger mass with the larger peaked roof was purposely abutted the open space, whereas the lower profile massing abutting existing would be more compatible. The garages are all set back, and the second floors are given some articulation in different forms, so that you're scaling down that kind of two-story element as much as possible. We also recognize the fact that the front porches is a common characteristic and is desirable in any neighborhood in terms of just providing more communication with owners sitting on front porch and the street traffic, so that these porches are actually extended on both ends to just to facilitate that purpose. These are, said, two-story. They're 3-bedroom family homes, and they're approximately 1,900 square feet, which is a modest size in today's market, but still obviously very marketable, with single car garages. There's sufficient space in front of each garage for an additional car to park without interfering to the city boulevard. There was an existing tree noted in the middle of the lot, which really wasn't feasible to retain on the basis of, first of all, the design of pairing the driveways. And by pairing the garages, you actually, it looks very similar to a double car garage in a single family home, which again, had the original idea of separating them was taken away from that idea. The back, if you just go over to the landscape drawing, so we've provided individual patios from the rear, access from the back, and also there'll be planting along the rear as well for everybody's privacy. Just going back to the front again, we are retaining the two large 50-centimeter trees on the perimeter, and there'll be some additional planting added that will, as we're working with our services, to make sure that we can restore some of the streetscape vegetation. And so I'd like to focus that these are designed primarily as 4 units, and what happens to the secondary units would be up to the individual homeowner. But the idea was that we think this is a good location for 4 units to introduce into the neighborhood, as opposed to putting these 4 units in the middle of the block. So the spatial piece is important, as Peter indicated, that this is what drew their attention to looking at this development in this particular spot.
I think if you want to move the slides forward, there's some other information that might be interesting for these are just sort of the location, specific design direction that the reason that this is appropriate. It's an end of block. I don't think that we would, it's not appropriate in sort of breaking up a mid block or deeper into the community. At least we don't think it is. And so these are the directions that were given to Bill to put together by Roberto. You want to go to the next slide? So here's, we just put up some of the architectural renderings, some of the things that were required. We're required to make to the city a parkland contribution, which we're required to do, and we will. It's estimated about $70,000, and that can that's used according to the city's parkland CIL fund. I think it's still 60-40. 60% of it goes to the citywide fund, and 60% stays within the community. We'll make an infrastructure contribution to the city that's prescribed, that is supposed to pay for infrastructure needed to support growth. We'll be providing at our part lot control program a noise study that will ensure that these conform to the city's noise program. We will have a landscape, as you saw, we have a landscaping program that will be subject to, again, discussion with the city on what they want to see. And we just wanted to say the parking will conform to the current zoning bylaw. We're not requesting any relief from the parking requirements of the city. So if you want to go to the next slide. There we go. We're at the end. So back to you, Chantal.
Hi, thank you. So before we move ahead to the question and answer period, I'm going to invite the councillor, Shirley, to say a few words.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I thought it was important to do this session tonight because people, I think, need to communicate to the city and to understand what the process is and communicate to the city what their feelings are on this type of application. And I think Peter was right when he said this community is not down for what the plan is in the official plan about intensification. And in there we have some contradiction, because I do know we got a lot of email from people objecting to the expansion of the urban boundary, but they also don't want intensification. And the fact is, if you need new housing, it's got to go either out or up. So that's important to remember, but we've made it pretty clear in this community that some moderate intensification is okay, but if it changes the character of the neighborhood, people don't want it in City View. However, the official plan definitely pushes toward more intensification. So we have to work with that as we deal with what comes out tonight. So thank you for being here. And thank you, Peter and Rob. Thanks.
All right, we have Nancy Wilson, the president of City View Community Association, that would like to say a few words before we moved on to the question and answers. So I'm going to invite Nancy. Nancy, were you ready?
I'm here.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. First of all, I just want to thank Councillor Shirley and his staff for setting up this information session for us. As well, we'd like to thank the city planner, Kathy Rigas, for coming out tonight, and the developer, Peter Hume, and his group for being here tonight to give us information and to answer our questions and to listen to our concerns. Then, of course, we must thank all of the residents who have taken the time tonight to come to this meeting and voice their opinions and their concerns. Chantel will post our community email for anyone who would like to talk to us about this or anything that you have questions about. Okay, City View, let's get started. Let's letting Mr. Hume and the city planner know what we, the community, are thinking about and feeling about this application at 75 Granton. And I'd like to start off by just saying, Mr. Hume, we do understand the draft official plan and what it says will be happening in this area. And we have already taken a huge hit on intensification in City View. And it's 60% up to 2046. So we've already probably taken 60% in City View as it is. My question to you, and then I'll leave it from that, is would you be willing to sell this property to the city? It's right on the border, on the hydro lines there, which is zoned O1P, which is parks and open space. Would you be willing to sell this property to the city? And they could pay for it with the cash in lieu that's owed to our community for things that we haven't collected or haven't been able to collect because of a mistake that hasn't been fixed yet. So the city could pay for that piece of property with that, or better still, if you'd like, you could donate it to our community. Anyway, that's all I have to say. And I'll let you get on with the question and answers, and thank you everybody for being here tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay, so we're gonna move ahead to the question and answers. We did receive a few in advance. So I'll go ahead with that. So what is being done to control water runoff from these properties, given that there are no storm sewers in the area and rainwater runoff must be handled by unbuilt overland?
So two things. As part of the zoning application, we're required to provide an adequacy of services report to the city that lays out the how or the capacity within the system to support the development. And the stormwater will be handled for these buildings the same way they would be handled if they were two single-family homes. I mean, which they very well could be. So, and there are standards that the city has, and we'll be providing as part of our part law control application a grading and drainage plan that shows how we're managing the water on site. And the specifications are we can't change, we've got to manage the drainage in the same way or better than exists today. So, I mean, and Kathy can confirm that. I may not have the engineering spec right, but you know, we can't change the drainage so it drains on a neighbor's property or it doesn't drain at all. So, and if we have to improve the swales on the front in the front of the house to convey the water, those are the requirements that the city will place on us.
And I'll confirm what Peter said, and we would ask that the ditch be reinstated, and that's something that's happening on the individual applications, is that the ditch be reopened in cases where it's filled in, and a culvert be placed for the driveways. And for all the developments as they take place, they end up improving the situation, because before the This was an older system where the sanitary was, the sewer were not a separated system. And so some of the stormwater is getting into the sanitary sewer with the current situation. So it actually improves the overall situation in the neighborhood. But as Peter said, this is something that's looked at in detail at a later stage with the part lot control application.
Thank you, Kathy. So we've got a few questions regarding parking. So why are an adequate number of parking spaces not required in the plan? So Kathy, can you speak to that?
Yes, the parking requirement for either a detached dwelling or a semi-detached dwelling is 1 parking space per unit. So in this case, that required parking space is the space that's located in the garage. So there's actually 2 spaces being provided. There's 1 in the garage and 1 in the driveway. And secondary dwelling units don't require any parking. And that's a city bylaw requirement, and that's citywide. So anyone in the city who constructs a basement apartment, they're not required to provide parking. So to say there's inadequate parking, that's not correct. They are meeting the parking requirements for the proposal.
Okay, we've got some questions here regarding the city's plan to address increased traffic through the neighborhood and to protect the safety of pedestrians, enforcement of current speed limit, traffic calming design improvements, and other safety measures. So I can address that. We've been working closely with the City View Community Association. They've done a traffic survey, I believe it was in April before their AGM. So we've been working with them in addressing some of those concerns that were raised. There are a few measures that are being implemented currently. There will be gateway signage coming to the area, as well as community welcome signs that ask people to be mindful. So those are some of the things that we've already approved, and we're going to continue working with the community to address traffic calming in this neighborhood. We've been talking about that, you know, just this week again, and I'll be following up with the traffic department on those also. In terms of enforcement of current speed limit, we do recommend that residents report speeding issues by filling out the online reporting to the Ottawa Police or calling the non-emergency line. In terms of dedicating the amount of enforcement to the neighborhood, that's the best way for them to know where the enforcement is needed as they receive the data from those reports. So next questions. How would garbage storage and collection be managed for this 8 units?
Well, for the semi-detached, they're semi-detached units the same. They'll be able to bring. They're going to be owner occupied. So the owner would bring the garbage and the recycling to the curb in the same way that any homeowner would do in the city. And the garbage would be for the secondary dwelling units would be handled the same way that the secondary dwelling units in your community are handled now. They bring it out to the curb and they bring it back in. You know, it's no different than how normal homeowners will handle their garbage.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I see dozens of other developers in City View who take similar properties to 75 Granton Avenue and build a pair of single family dwellings. Why do you conclude that this proposal with attendant zoning change is a required business approach. Oh, you're on mute.
Can you just repeat that last sentence?
So why is that the approach for this application rather than building a pair of single family dwellings?
Well, when we looked at the lot, and we looked at its location at the end of a block next to the hydro corridor, abutting an R2 zone at the rear, with with other sort of multiple units in close proximity. We started to look at what was the most appropriate for that end, and we determined that a pair of semi-detached was probably the best use of the property, given those locational characteristics. If 75 Granton had been in the middle of the block, we probably wouldn't be proposing semi-detached units. We'd probably be going to the committee of adjustment to build to singles. So it's very location specific, and I think that it's the proximity to the empty space or the open space beside us that allows that appropriate transition to happen.
Okay, thank you. If this zoning bylaw changes from R1 FF 632 to R2E, does this mean that the developer can go ahead and build with no conditions and without going to the committee of adjustment if all other setbacks are met? Kathy?
I can handle that. The park lot control application would replace the severance. So what that does is create the conveyable parcels. So that's right, that a committee of adjustment application would not be required. The zoning would establish basically that the use is permitted, that a semi-detached is allowed, and the R2E specifies the lot width, the lot area, and the setbacks. So as long as the proposal is within those provisions and the concept does meet the provisions, for example, R2E requires a minimum lot frontage of 7.5 meters for semi and an area of, I think it's around 225 square meters. If it meets those provisions, then through the park lot control application, we can create the individually conveyable parcels. So it's basically the same as going through a severance. So, but the short answer is that's right. A committee of adjustment application is not required because it's being done through a park lot control application.
Okay. Are there any conditions put on the developer when a zoning bylaw is changed?
No, a zoning cannot incorporate conditions. So the zoning is changed. That creates basically the buildable envelope for the proposal, but the zoning does not approve like these specific units. So through a rezoning, we are not approving, for example, those building elevations or a specific grading plan. That comes later through the part lot control application. But the zoning, once it's in effect, it's in effect, and we cannot put conditions in a rezoning.
But the
But the park lot, perhaps I can elaborate and say through the park lot control application, we can require, the typical conditions you might get in a severance. For example, they will already have addressed grading, drainage, the building elevations, the siting of the building. So through the part lot control, we can have a package of approved plans. So we have a grading plan, we have a servicing plan. All of those details are dealt with through that application. And when everything is satisfactory, at that point, we can approve the part lot control application. So that's where conditions come in. Also, for example, payment of cash in lieu, that it would not be finalized until cash in lieu has been paid. And that's an amount that it's money that's paid to the city to replace the fact that they cannot dedicate parkland. So we do an appraisal of the property and they pay cash in lieu. It's based on the value of 1 hectare of parkland for every 500 dwelling units. So whatever the calculation is, I believe Peter said it was in the neighborhood of $70,000. We haven't done that calculation, obviously, at this point, but that does take place. And that would be one of the conditions that must be paid before it's final. So the conditions that you're thinking of would be tied to a park lot control application rather than the rezoning. Peter, did you want to
Okay.
add anything to that? Or did I cover it?
You said what I was going to say.
Okay.
It's the part lot control that imposes all the development conditions.
Yes.
Okay, so would only the lot of 75 Granton be rezoned or the surrounding area? How would other applicants have to seek approvals for rezoning?
I can answer that again. It would be just this property. The application has been submitted only for 75 Granton, no other properties. So if another property owner wanted to submit an application, they would go through the same process. They would submit an application with the required documentation and it would be evaluated. And to approve one doesn't mean it's automatically the same for another one. Each application is considered in its site-specific context. But it does not affect any other properties in the neighborhood. So anyone else who wanted to apply must go through their own process.
Okay.
So it's just important to put that into layman's terms. So rezonings are not precedent setting.
No.
So you can't say, another applicant can't say, well, you're doing it there, so you have to do it here. And that's not the way people think that's the way it works, but that's not the way it works. It's very location specific. So if you were deep in City View and someone came along in the middle of a block and said, well, they did on R2 zone over here, can we do it here? I think the answer would be no. So.
Okay, so we have a few questions regarding, can you provide the cases where an application can be denied? And what percentage of community contested zoning changes get approved?
I can add what was the first part of the question?
Can you provide the cases where an application might be denied?
An
Like
application,
just kind of an example.
okay, well, an application would be denied where it's not consistent with the policies in the official plan. And that's not just one policy that I can name. We look at it in terms of there are many sections of the official plan we have to have regard to. And we evaluate each application according to those policies. And if it's not consistent with the policies, there's also a higher level document above the official plan, what's called the provincial policy statement. So that applies to all of Ontario. That's the highest level planning document in Ontario. Then we have our official plan and other guidelines. So we evaluate each application looking at that. And if it doesn't satisfy the policies, then we recommend refusal. So it's not, each application is different. Each one is evaluated on its own merits. And what was the last part? There is no threshold where if 60% of the community objects or opposes it, that we don't approve it. It's again, based on policy. The public comments are taken into account and they are incorporated into a planning committee report. Anyone can go on ottawa.ca. There's a section called City Council and Committees, and there's a link, and all the planning committee agendas are there and all the reports are available. So if someone was interested, they can email me and I could tell them how to find them, and they could review any planning committee report, and they're all very similar in format, that we have to identify what the policies are, how the proposal either met or didn't meet them. In other words, we have to have a rationale for our recommendation. And then there's a section on public consultation in terms of how many comments were received, what the concerns were, and then what our responses to the comments are. So all that's incorporated into a report, but there is no automatic number where if, you know, a certain percentage of people oppose it, that it's not approved, or if people are all in favor, that it is approved, because the planning staff decision is based on policy.
Okay. Let's just find the next one. Sorry, I'm just going through the comments to pick out some of the questions that are coming up.
Hi, Chantel. If I may, while
What's that, sir?
while you're doing that, I do have a question here from Greg Elliott, who is the president of the Crestview Community Association, which is neighboring City View. So I'd like to ask his question while you're doing that. So Greg asked,
go ahead.
how many primary and how many secondary dwelling units will be located within each physical structure?
I can answer that. It's two pairs of semi-detached. So a pair of semi-detached is 2 units split vertically. So it's 2 semis, and altogether there are 4 semis. And then each unit is allowed to have a secondary dwelling unit. So it is two pairs of semis, each with a basement apartment. But it's not one big complex. There was some misinformation that was being spread about it being something called an 8-unit multiplex. A multiplex isn't a planning term. It's not a definition. It's not a unit type. This is not an apartment or stacks or anything like that. It's 2 pairs of semi-detached, and each of those units is allowed to have a basement apartment. So it's 8 altogether, but that question just makes it sound a little more complex than it is. It's, you know, 4 half doubles, and they each have a basement apartment. So 8 altogether.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Chantel?
Okay, so there's a question here regarding whether the city is considering restrictions on street parking as there exists near Algonquin College. This is something that we have been discussing with the community association, and we are going to be getting an answer from the traffic department. However, when there is no parking installed, there would be a need for consultation with the residents of that street in particular. All right, there's some that we've already addressed. Okay, this one, how will each unit have separate entrances for multiple tenants to safely access?
Bill, do you want to, and you're talking about how ours will, right? So Bill, do you want to respond to that?
Well, the principal entrances face the street, and the any potential secondary unit, their entrances on the side yards.
Okay. Can we address where garbage will be stored prior to pickup? So that would go with the property standards policies, where garbages have to be kept in closed containers.
Or typically it'd be into, they'd create a storage container in the garage.
Mhm.
I mean, there could be provisions made for storage at the exterior and the rear yards that's sometimes used, but that would be something that the detail we'd have to manage. But in most cases, even when you have towns, et cetera, they're all relying on basically in-unit temporary holding until garbage day.
Okay. Kathy, this one, if this gets approved, does that mean there will be precedents for there to be similar developments here?
No, as I explained earlier, each application is evaluated on its own merits, and it doesn't set a precedent. As Peter mentioned, it doesn't mean that if one is approved in a particular location, that another one, 5 blocks away in a different situation would be approved. So no, it doesn't set a precedent.
Okay, so there's a question here whether a moratorium on further infill could be instilled until there's storm sewers installed.
That question was raised, I think, at the Committee of Adjustment. The City View Community Association asked something similar to that through the Committee of Adjustment about 2 years ago. And the answer from planning staff is no, that there's no need to put, there's something called an interim control bylaw, which is a tool that can be used to stop development. But in this case, it wasn't considered necessary, that the severances and minor variances that were being approved to allow the 50-foot lots, that's all being done as orderly development, and it's in keeping with the character of the neighborhood and meets planning policies. So there's no need to, from a planning perspective, to impose any kind of interim controls on it. And for the purposes of storm sewers, that's also not, it's not an issue that prohibits development. As we mentioned, we have infrastructure engineers that are reviewing these applications. Any development has to go through adequacy of servicing brief to have that reviewed. Their grading and stormwater plans are reviewed, and the sort of the minor intensification that's happening now, it actually makes the situation better because the ditches are being opened, and it allows the water to flow in a better manner than where they've all been filled in. And the city has been doing some work on both they had looked at the sanitary drainage and the storm situation. And there's certainly not an issue that would trigger a complete hold on it. If you wanted to give me a moment, I do have an email specifically about that. I would have to just bring it up.
No problem.
Okay, well, you can come back to me. You can go on to the next question, and then you can just remind me later. I do have something that an engineer wrote.
Yeah. Okay, so there's more questions about parking on streets, which we've already discussed. So any restrictions of parking on street would have to be discussed with the residents on that street, which is something that we can look at. So we've got lots of comments and questions, so I'm just trying to go through.
Well, I have one on my own. I'm just curious, how many vehicles can fit on each of those driveways? And can we guarantee that those garages will fit at least one vehicle? Peter? You're on mute.
I didn't hear that question. You froze on my screen for a while.
Okay. No, I'm just curious, how many vehicles can fit on each driveway? And can we guarantee that, say, you know, a minivan could fit into a garage?
So I'll ask Bill to talk about whether the minivan fits in the garage, but there are really strict rules around how wide the driveways can be now. Yeah, so you can't have, and Kathy, I don't think you can have more than a 3-meter driveway, right? On a,
No, it's actually less, Peter. It's 2.6 based on lot width. So that's under the current bylaws. But to answer your question in terms of minivan, so they're 10 by 20, and because of grading, we have sufficient height. That's one of the issues with minivans. So there is the height to accommodate a minivan as well as the length and width. And parking, we have a minimum of parking space because we have no sidewalks, but we can park at least one car and probably one medium-sized car and a small car on the driveway. So you could actually park 3 cars.
Okay, I'll accept that, but I'm just looking at the renderings. I mean, it looks like you could fit possibly 2. And I'm asking about the accommodations for a minivan inside a garage, because the primary dwellings look like they are geared towards families. And for any family that I know that have, especially if they have children that have extracurriculars such as hockey, they generally travel with a minivan. So that's why I'm asking about that.
Right.
So can we confirm?
Confirm a minivan,
That will
yes,
be looked
and then
at.
at least one additional car outside.
Because if there's going to be a secondary dwelling in the basement of each of those 4 units, there is a possibility that that person may need a vehicle and have their own vehicle to put in the driveway, especially in the wintertime.
I've done many secondary dwellings, and I've gone back often to clients after the fact, and most their tenants do not have cars. They're smaller units, and so they're affordable units, and usually most do not have a car. But I'm not making an overall assessment, but that's generally the trend in the inner core area, because people are at a certain stage in their life to that they're not relying on car transportation. They're relying on public transit.
I understand that. However, there is a possibility that we can, well, the thing is, we cannot make assumptions on who will be living in any of these units. Like, are the primary dwellings going to be rental units as well, or are they going to be bought?
No, they're freehold.
So hi Rachel, it's Roberto here. I'll speak to that. So I've been on the sidelines, letting the design and planning experts tackle most of the questions and explain, and they've done a great job. So the whole notion of secondary dwelling units, as it was said earlier, any resident in the city of Ottawa within their own home, probably with the exception of Rockcliffe Park, can add or apply for a secondary dwelling. The intention here is not to create, this is not a rental project by any means. I would probably travel 50 yards to the east if the intention was to, a baseline road, or you take your pick. If the intention was to create a rental project, much more affordable, much lower cost to acquire any property or land. So the intention here, these have been very tastefully designed. Bill Ritzy, who's a seasoned architect, many years in the business, an architect, not a run-of-the-mill designer. So all of the attempts that have been put forth to make this an attractive project for upper scale or higher end dwellings, period. So that's the starting point. The secondary dwelling, I can guarantee you the 50-foot lot creation that has gone on in the neighborhood, and a lot of the newer homes that have been built on 50-foot lots, I can guarantee you that most of them have finished basements, which act as nanny suites or in-law suites, age in place, parents, et cetera, et cetera. It's a feature to be added to an already, a higher end type of home that's being built these days. And that's a bit of a trend. So that's the intention. And so the second,
Okay, sorry to interrupt, but that intention is why I'm bringing it up, because these will not, if these secondary dwellings 10-to-1, based on preference by a family, they're less a family living. Oh, my internet connection is unstable here. Can you check here? I'm going to disconnect here from the other computer here. Okay, so a family living in a primary dwelling is not going to want to rent to students and have a student living in the basement, knowing or not knowing, but making an assumption based on the student's behavior based on a stereotype of college students. They're going to, family with young children is going to want to rent to a young professional. Young professionals usually have a vehicle because they can't get to where they need to go by bus at a certain time, because quite frankly, our bus system is unreliable. And I'm only saying what a lot of people are thinking here. And that's why I bring up these points, is that we need to make sure that if parking is an issue, people are saying it everywhere, and I'm seeing a lot of it. We need to make sure that we have accommodated the high likelihood that these secondary dwelling renters are going to have a vehicle, and they're going to need some place to put that vehicle, especially in the winter time. Those streets are already narrow, and when it comes to winter time and they're removing snow, those snow banks are 3 to 6 feet high at any given time. They won't be able to park on the streets. They're going to have to be in a driveway. Is there room in those driveways for at least 2 vehicles?
Right. So no, I understand the point. I guess I'll back up a second here. The whole proposition to begin with, even a future purchaser of one of these homes, someone may choose to rent, but it's not likely. Like, the intention is not to the price point at which the homes will be set, the design, the style, the whole thing. It's really to create a single family environment with a finished basement and have a separate entrance to it, because that's smart design. Whether it's a nanny or an in-law, you want to give someone the privacy to it. The renting of the basement, although it's a possibility, and whoever buys the future home, we're building this for resale, not for as a rental project, not to build and keep as a rental. The future buyer may choose to do that. However, it's really not likely given the cost of such thing. Rental units are much more affordable. Newer rental units are much more affordable just around the corner, up and down baseline. So I want to make it clear that my intention is not to create a rental project. The basement dwellings, because it's permitted by the city of Ottawa, it's smart design, period. And so it's likely having done this many times, it's likely going to be used as a finished basement for the family above. And in the future, parents and perhaps outside help, caregiver, et cetera. You may have the odd scenario where someone rents it and a car may or may not appear, whoever rents it. A student is not going to rent. It's not that sort of scenario. And I understand where it's coming from, because that sort of thing is probably happening throughout the neighborhood in other properties, probably the older ones. And maintenance becomes a problem, and traffic and noise. I understand all of that. I drove by a block from Granton, where the newer 50-foot lots have been created and the newer homes have been built. I drove by a house with 6 cars in the driveway. This is one single home on a 50-foot lot. Beautiful home, beautifully built, 6 cars on a daily basis. So I don't think that's something you can control. I just, from my perspective, would like to make clear that the intent and everything behind the design and the higher end home, et cetera, the intent is not the term rental is being tossed around over the past hour. I think that's the last consideration, and it is a possibility. Anything's a possibility, but I think that's really should be the last consideration or the last concern, because it's not likely to be the end result of who lives there and the use of the homes.
Well, I think a lot of people in the community will disagree with you based on the proximity to Algonquin College, and the fact that this is an ongoing issue that's been continuing throughout the years, and especially as our demographic, our population has grown. We're over 1.2 million people, and Algonquin College itself is expanding. And they also have more and more people coming in from, other parts of the province to come to school. So I think that I think that's one of the primary drivers of a lot of these student housing concerns and rental concerns are coming from the community. And I'm seeing this not just from the past, couple of weeks from this development, this planning notice came out. This has been ongoing, and we get these concerns coming into our office for years and years and years and years. So we cannot make any assumptions that it will not happen, because the likelihood of it actually happening is extremely high. Anyway, those are my questions, and I appreciate you taking the time to respond.
Let me just circle back for a second and answer one of the questions you asked. How long the driveway from curb from street face to garage is 12.4 meters. Standard parking space, it's 5.2 in length. So so you've got two. Like, I'm not saying that it's probably, you probably run afoul of front yard parking, but you asked how many standard parking spaces are in that driveway from where it starts at the street to where it hits the garage. There, that you can mark out 2 standard parking spaces and a parking space in the garage. I'm not sure that I would say that they're legal parking spaces, but you asked how long that driveway is.
Yeah,
it's long enough to accommodate 2 vehicles. At least that's what our site plan is showing.
okay. And plus,
And I'd like to add that secondary dwelling units never require any parking. So what's proposed here is meeting our parking requirements. And given the location, it's close to Algonquin College, where if it was a student, they would likely be walking. It's also very close to the Baseline Transit Station. So the city is not encouraging more parking. We're really working towards minimal parking everywhere, encouraging more transit supportive uses. So we would certainly, in a situation like this, we would never ask for more parking than the bylaw requires. So we are, fully on board. There may be a perceived problem with parking, and if people are parking on the street in the neighborhood, they're allowed to park on the street, but we certainly would not require extra parking for the basement apartments. Just as a philosophy, we're moving towards lowering parking requirements, not increasing them. So I just wanted to emphasize that's the city position on that with respect to these secondary dwelling units.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, it was only a couple of years ago that in Center Point, the city came along and wanted to eliminate all parking requirements for new buildings, including high-rise apartments. So there would have been no parking required at all. And we got Center Point exempted from that for a few years, but that's still the direction. There are several members of council downtown and several staff people who want to eliminate the requirement for any parking. And that's the direction things are going, and it isn't toward providing more parking.
All right. Thank you, everyone on that. Next question, what is the minimum lot width for our R2E for the one side of the semi? Kathy?
7.5 meters.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. How do we confirm that cash in lieu in lieu of parkland comes back to our community?
there's a standard formula where 60% of the cash in lieu goes into a citywide fund and 40% goes into the specific ward fund. And that is the formula under the cash in lieu of parkland bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Next. Okay, this there's a comment and a question here. I'd love to see a requirement for permeable driveways where too much of the lot is built on or green roofs. Can the city mandate this?
I don't think we can require it. That's not a standard.
Okay. All right. What we are concerned with is the precedent. Tomorrow, if developer is using the same arguments to change the zoning in other locations in City View, will they be approved?
As I've mentioned before, each application is considered on its own merits based on its location, the surrounding uses, and the policies that are applicable. So I think we've already gone over that no, it's not an automatic A got approved, so B will get approved. Each application for a rezoning is site specific and must be evaluated independently based on the circumstances of that particular site.
This would be a question for Mr. Hume. So what, if any, other plans you have if R2 is not granted?
We don't have any other plans. We've submitted what we believe is from our perspective, the best and most sustainable plan for our proposal. So we don't have any designs in our back pocket that we can, oops, here we go. I mean, this is what we believe is most appropriate, and that's what we're moving forward with.
Okay. All right. Let's just see. All right, how would garbage in the garage be accessible for both tenants when the secondary unit only has access to the side yard?
There have to be some provision made on the side yard in some fashion. If an event it is a separate tenancy.
Okay. All right. Christian, you had a question. Would you be able to put it into the comments, and I can go over it if you haven't done so already? Let's see. Right. Has the city considered the access of ambulances with additional cars parked on both sides of the street?
I would say the parking situation won't change. There's only so many legal parking spaces. And if they're full now and they're full when other people move in, it's still the same number of spaces. The right of way on the street is very wide compared to many new neighborhoods. So there certainly isn't an issue with emergency access on the street.
Okay, someone's asking what areas are covered in the inner core. Now, with our discussions through the official plan, it was confirmed that City View would be considered in the outer transect rather than the inner as originally proposed. Someone's asking if you could define affordability. I believe that it was mentioned that the secondary dwelling units would be affordable.
There's sort of a capital A affordability that is in the official plan that relates to, I don't remember what the specific, it's like not exceeding X% of income at such and such a threshold, but we're not talking capital A affordability. It's, I think when Peter was talking about affordable, simply that the cost of a basement 2-bedroom apartment is less than potentially other types of housing might be. So that is more affordable than for example, renting a 3-bedroom house. You could rent a 2-bedroom apartment for less. That's all. It's not affordability in the sense of it's an affordable unit tied to a program. It simply would cost less than some other forms of housing.
Okay.
So would the cost of that rental be determined by the homeowner? Thank you.
Right, the rental, and I think Roberto, the homeowner, the person who purchases these units will determine what rent he's going to charge for, he or she is going to charge for their secondary dwelling unit, if they rent it out at all. I mean, so there are the three options, or the options. They may not rent it at all, so.
Okay, let's see. Sorry, there's quite a bit to go through. Okay, so a lot more about parking. So I think we've addressed those. Can you guarantee that cash in lieu will be collected on this development?
Yes, it's a requirement. Like we're through a part lot control application, we can tie I said earlier that we can't tie conditions to a rezoning. We can to a part lot control application, and we would that would be one of the conditions. So it would be cash in lieu of parkland calculated under the standard formula that I mentioned earlier, and that would be a requirement of the part lot control bylaw. So a part lot control bylaw is a bylaw that gets passed by council that legally enables the lot to be split into different conveyable parcels. And that bylaw is required before they can convey the parcels separately. So we would have a condition that says cash in lieu would be paid And that has to be paid and evidence provided before council approves the bylaw. So we've done this in other situations. I've just done this recently on 2 other proposals where it was a condition of the part lot control, and it's easily implemented and controlled by, basically the bylaw doesn't happen if they don't pay it. And if they don't pay it, they don't get the bylaw, and then the parcels can't be individually conveyed. So we have a mechanism to ensure that it's done. So the short answer is yes, but we have the ability to require that.
Okay, so CIL is usually based on severances, and these historic lots are 25 feet and don't usually require severances. So that's been one of the concerns for collection of CIL in this neighborhood.
Yeah, this isn't going through a severance. So this is a different process. It's part lot control. And we've advised the applicant that, for example, should it be approved, would be a condition of the application. So this isn't a severance. It may seem like a administrative, nitpicking, but it's a different process. So I've just explained why we can collect it. So regardless of what's happening with severances, we can.
Okay. Has there been previous R2E rezoning applications in City View in recent years that have been denied?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I can't, not to say that have been denied or been approved for that matter. I don't know of any off the top of my head, but I haven't really done any work in the City View area previously that there was a sort of geographic redistribution of development review areas. And this is an area that was covered by a different group. So personally, I haven't worked on projects in this area, but I'm not aware of any. But I can look if someone is interested, but I'm not aware of there having been any. But that's not to say there haven't, but I'd have to look into it.
What about the strain on existing sewage and piping that was not built to accommodate such type of development?
I think we addressed that earlier, that the application is going through a review for engineering, and there's been no concerns identified. The ditches would be opened. The water system has the capacity to handle additional units, and there are no storm sewers, but the ditches would be opened on any new application. And we do have engineers that are reviewing the application from all the infrastructure components. So either capacity and infrastructure is not something, the situation isn't something that would prohibit any kind of infill or prohibit a rezoning. They do have to look at that as part of the rezoning application. And that's still under review. So I mentioned earlier in the meeting about the different steps, and that the comment period is ending. So the comment period isn't just for the public, it's also for many different technical agencies and city departments. So the application is being reviewed by many other, like I'll call them subject matter experts. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a forester, I'm not, various experts we have. So other people are looking at it and will provide me with comments. So all of these kinds of aspects are being looked at by the right people within the city, and they provide comments to me. And they may, if they have a concern or a question, we provide that to the applicant and they have to address it. So.
Okay. Is the character of this neighborhood being considered in this application?
Yes, that's part of when I say we evaluate the applications in the context of planning policies. That's part of it. We look at, there are policies that support intensification. There are also policies for transition and appropriate compatibility. So yes, that's all looked at in the course of any application, not just this one.
Okay, how narrow can R1 FF lots be?
19.5 meters.
Okay.
And that's without a variance.
Yes, I'm giving what the lot requirement is in the bylaw. The R1 FF is 19.5 meters.
I think this was already answered. Does the R2E rezoning with the two semis require the property to be severed into 4 separate lots? So I think that was already being addressed by the part lot control you said.
Yeah, so let's be, I think we should be
Yeah.
clear about that, that process and what Kathy said. So there are 2 ways to create lots in Ontario. One is through a severance process, and one is through what's called a part lot control application. And the part lot control application can have a number of conditions on it. And what happens is you have to meet all the conditions, and one of them is paying cash in lieu fees. One may be entering into a development agreement with the city that requires you to build. It's the plans. There are a bunch of conditions that are placed on the creation of the parcels. And this, although City Council approves the bylaw to create the parcels, it isn't until you meet all of those conditions that the city actually registers the bylaw with the land registry office and creates the parcels. So the other way to do it is to make an application to the committee, a consent application to the Committee of Adjustment, and you go through that process. But when you're rezoning a property, city staff often will tell you that it's more appropriate to, if you can, to use part lot control applications to go with a rezoning process where that's appropriate. Land that's not on a plan of subdivision must go to the Committee of Adjustment. So you can't use the part lot control process in that regard, but we're getting well into the weeds. But there is a process to create the lots that's very, that I think is at a higher standard than a consent application for the committee. But
okay, there's a question of whether the units are going to be marketed or sold as private homes with granny suites.
They will be marketed for sale as private homes with secondary dwelling units, nanny suites, call them whatever you want to call them, but that's to be probably interpreted by the future buyer on how it will be used. But we will build them as a secondary dwelling unit, and the future buyer, and you know, it will demand a certain price tag. So the future buyer will then decide how they plan to use that space.
Okay, so this question, Kathy, you might be able to answer. R1FF at 38 Rossland is only 15.4 meters. So are lots allowed to be less?
I can't comment on a specific lot. The figure I gave is the provision in the bylaw. If someone goes into the comprehensive bylaw and looks up R1FF, the minimum lot width is 19.5 meters. So there may be a lot of record that is less, but I'm talking about what the minimum zoning lot width is, and it's 19.5 meters.
Okay, and so for a different width, it would require a minor variance.
That's
To
correct.
the Committee of Adjustment.
Where the 100-foot lots are being split into two for two singles, that requires a minor variance to reduce the lot width from 19.5 to whatever they are asking for. So yes, but the bylaw, that doesn't change the bylaw requirement, but a minor variance can grant a reduction in the required lot width. So that's the purpose of a minor variance.
Okay, we've got Greg from the Crestview Community Association that has his hand up. Greg, could you put your question in the comments in the chat for me? Sorry, I'm just going to give a minute here. Can a secondary dwelling unit not have a separate title of ownership?
No, it's not a conveyable unit.
So it has to be part of the main unit.
Yes. And that's in the zoning bylaw has requirements for secondary dwelling units. And it's, you know, typically it's, they may be built in the basement, or they may be built, someone may convert a garage, or it could be even part of the main floor, but it can't be separately conveyed. So it's owned by the person in the main unit.
Okay. All right. So it's now 8:20. I think we're going to start wrapping up. I could take a couple more questions before we close. And if your question hasn't been answered, please don't hesitate to send us a message. We've tried to go through the list as best we could. But we'll be happy to get back to you by email if your question hasn't been answered. Okay, so I want to thank everyone again for being here tonight. Oh, we've got one more here. Okay, and I think this has been already answered, but to what extent does the city listen to the community? So in these applications, Kathy, like the feedback received from the community?
The feedback from the community is taken into account together with the policy context that I've described. And that's outlined like in any planning committee report that goes to planning committee, we do take into consideration public comments. So it's taken into account, but as I mentioned, it's not that there's a dividing line where if you say, well, 70% of the people who commented are opposed, that then you know it will be refused. There is no magic number like that. That everything, we have to look at it as a policy decision with public consultation. So we're doing the consultation now and we take it into account. But just so that, I know the question came up earlier about, you know, what percentage has to oppose it. And there is no magic number with that, but we are taking into account, you know, the comments I'm getting from the community. So I have gotten a lot. And generally, they're expressing a lot of the same concerns. But anyone who hasn't sent me comments is welcome, as I mentioned, to continue to send that. The deadline on the letter was July 16th, but that doesn't mean that we, you know, there's a deadline and that I don't take them after that. So feel free to continue to send them in.
Okay, so I've just put your email in there, Kathy, for those.
Okay.
So I know there's lots of people that have sent you comments already. Some have been sent to our office as well, or copied to both of us. So to those who haven't sent their feedback to Kathy, please, do so. In terms of comments sent to our office, we're only allowed to share them with your permission. So they are kept confidential unless we're advised to share them with the planner. So again, I want to thank everyone. If your questions haven't been answered tonight, please send us a message and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. I want to thank the Community Association for being here tonight and for helping promote this public consultation. And I want to thank the Planning Department and the applicants for being here as well. Councillor, would you like to say anything?
Yes, there's a question that I keep seeing in different forms, which is why do you take policy as something that's as important as the concerns of residents? Well, there are a couple of reasons for that appearance. And the first one is that all of these policies that are part of the official plan were generated as a result of extremely expensive and involved community consultation processes 4 years ago. So that those policies were taken to the community, and there was a big push by the community to do more intensification back then. So because of that, it's become the official plan. Now, whatever council does on this or any other project, when they vote, let's say they vote for the project and people don't like it, they can appeal to LPAT, which used to be the OMB. They can appeal there, but when you get there, what LPAT does is evaluate whether the decision of council was within the official plan. So if council passes something that's outside the official plan, that can be overturned by LPAT. If council passes something that's inside the official plan, it will probably be protected by LPAT. So everybody is going to act respecting the official plan. And it's important to remember that we're in the middle of the next official plan right now. So I know a lot of folks from City View have written to me saying they don't want more urban sprawl. They don't want the urban boundary expanding. Well, that means that you're supporting more intensification. So you have to really say where you stand on intensification as we do this official plan, because I don't think City View wants more intensification, but for some reason, nobody wants to come out and say that. So I think they need to come out and say that. But in the interim, the reason for respecting the official plan is it's built into our law that anything you do that does not respect the official plan can be overturned. So having said that, thank you to everyone for taking part in this. I think we've got a strong message from the community that like what people don't want is all the single family home properties, as we call them, to become 6 or 8 unit properties. And in City View, that's important as well. I know in City View, we're talking about the fact that there are no storm sewers and no sidewalks, but we have a long history on that. And I know 10 years ago, there was an effort to put in storm sewers that was headed by this City View Community Association. And the community by and large rejected that, partly because of what the community's costs would mean for each resident. But the community rejected that. And when it came to sidewalks, there have been a couple cases where We've surveyed a whole street and asked if they want a sidewalk, and they say yes, but then we find out things like they want the sidewalk, but only on the other side of the street and things like that. And obviously you can't put a sidewalk in on the other side of the street for everyone. It's got to be on someone's side of the street. So those issues are things we can deal with the community association as time goes on, and Nancy Wilson and Jill Pro will help us do that. But there isn't a consensus on that. There appears to be a consensus in City View against significant intensification. And one thing we can be happy about this application is that it's not like we've seen in other parts where people have come into 2-story neighborhoods and proposed a 24-story apartment building. That's not what this proposal is. So we should be looking at not only what the proposal is, but what it could have been. And so you don't want the future of the neighborhood to change like in a negative way. And but it's worth looking at how much better this is compared to what it could have been. So let's get the message out as City Council looks at this current draft official plan. Get the message out about what's important to you in City View, because this is a time that they will listen for the next 5 to 10 years. Again, thank you for coming out. Thank you, Kathy and Peter and Roberto. And thank you to my staff, Chantal and Rachel. Okay, good night.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Good night, everyone.